All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Screen Review. My name is Megan.
And I'm Dina.
Okay, today we are reviewing Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse, released in 2018. It's 1 hour and 56 minutes long, and it is rated PG.
So for the beginning, we're going to do our spoiler-free review, right? And yeah, also make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Boca Tribune. Megan, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So we'll just get right into the spoiler-free review points. So I'm going to go ahead and mention the obvious, the unique animation style. It's done almost to seem like a comic book. Like you're reading a comic book, but you're watching a comic book. So they'll often have those little text bubbles come up that you see that you read in little mangas or comic books. And the animation style follows suit with that, like the pows and the zaps and stuff. Like it's pretty cool the way that they've done that. It makes it really interesting to watch because it's almost not like a classic animation that you'd normally find. I thought that was interesting.
It's really cool. I also love the soundtrack of the movie. We talk a lot about on the show about how we think music and like soundtracks are really important. And in this movie, I think it's amazing. I love it. It's like good music. Like, you know, it's not just background music, which I love. And the main character has a good voice. So it adds to the whole thing. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. It's probably, although it's a kids movie, I could still say it is one of my favorite movies. Would you agree?
I would agree. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I like watching kids movies sometimes. There's something so fun and like innocent about them. You know, everything is going to work out at the end of the movie. Like, it's nice. I thought this movie's like heartfelt, funny, and overall just extremely entertaining the whole time. You know, it takes the classic Spider-Man story and just gives it a few twists. So I really enjoyed it. It was unique and fun to watch because at this point, how many Spider-Man movies are there? There's a lot.
Millions.
Exactly. So, you know, it just kind of took the traditional storyline that it normally follows and just gave it, you know, something else, something more entertaining to watch. I thought that was nice. So overall, I really liked it. Anything else to add spoiler-free, Dina?
No, I think that's all for the spoiler-free. I think we can go into the actual nitty-gritty of the movie, I'd say.
I think so, too. So if you haven't watched it yet, go watch it and come back and we'll tell you all the spoiler review points, everything we thought about it. So basically the introduction of the movie, I mean, you see the traditional Spider-Man, you know, Peter Parker, the one we all know, and he says that he's been Spider-Man for 10 years. And at this point, there are a few quotes that come out that I think were important. This one's a kind of common theme throughout the movie. You know, with great power comes great responsibility. They mentioned it a lot. It's very important to the central idea of the movie. And I also thought that there was a funny little thing they had because this Spider-Man, during his intro, you know, he's flying throughout the city. He kind of gives you a glimpse into his life, you know, married to MJ, he saves the city, he saves it thousands of times. And he says, there's only one Spider-Man and you're looking at him. I thought it was funny because, I mean, the whole point of this movie is that there's a lot of Spider-Mans.
What I liked about that part is like when they kind of show his character and they kind of reference like past Spider-Man that like he's kind of like based off of. So like if you've ever watched the original Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire, they kind of reference him at one point. There's like this really iconic scene in I think like Spider-Man 2. I want to say, where he's like walking down the street and he's like dancing and he's like flirting with these girls and they're all looking at him like gross, like get away from me. But he's like has all this confidence and they reference that scene because it's such like an iconic scene, which I loved. Throughout this movie, you see a lot of like pop cultural references, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Definitely a lot of references to everything and anything Spider-Man. They even mentioned the little Spider-Man popsicle that he has.
Yeah,
like, they mention everything, exactly.
The comic books, the music, the little Spider-Man theme song.
Exactly. And you know, the thing is, I think, I'll say it, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies don't get enough appreciation.
For sure. I think they're so good.
I agree. So getting back to Into the Spider-Verse, you know, you see this Spider-Man, the only Spider-Man ever, and then you meet the main character, Miles Morales. And he's just in his room listening to music, one of the songs, Sunflower, that I think was made for this movie, I want to say.
It was.
It was made for this movie. Post Malone, yes. So you get an introduction kind of into his life, and he's rushing to get out the door to go to school. His dad's a cop, and his mom's a healthcare worker, and everyone, you know, they have to be somewhere at the same time. So Miles is starting a new school. He starts to walk. He sees all his friends at the old school that he was at, and then his dad comes and grabs him to drive him to school. And the reason that he does this is because Miles is kind of going all over the city and slapping these like stickers onto things. And so the dad's like, stop doing that. Like, it's vandalism. Just come with me and I'll take you to school. And I thought that the next scene was really funny. The like, I love you scene with the cop car.
Yeah, I love that. It was funny. He like basically Miles got out of the car and his dad was like, say I love you, but he said it like in the cop speaker, like, you know, like cops have like those speakers outside of their car or whatever. And he was like, Dad, this is embarrassing, like as he's walking into school. And he's like,
yeah, because like everyone was outside of school and he was just like, say it back, like say it back. So Miles had to be like, love you, Dad, like love you, Dad. And then at that point he was like, all right, you know, copy. And so Miles is already off to like kind of a rough start in this school experience because everyone's making fun of him because, you know, in middle school, you know, it's embarrassing to say I love you to your parents. Like it's like everyone's like, oh, like dorky.
You love your parents?
Exactly. Ew.
Yeah, gross. Something from that scene I liked, this might be overanalyzing it, but I noticed a lot of the time it's like a common theme in like movies where like the child will sit in a back seat and the parent in the front seat kind of shows like disconnect or whatever. But the funny thing is that it is a cop, so his son is literally sitting like behind bars in the seat, so it's like kind of like literally like a cage in between them, which I just thought was like an interesting
it is interesting
thought to have.
Definitely. So I would say the next scene of importance would be you kind of get an introduction into Uncle Aaron. And Uncle Aaron was only mentioned a little bit before, where the dad says the reason that Miles is entering this new, more prestigious school that Miles thinks is elitist is because the dad says, oh, you don't want to end up like your Uncle Aaron. Like, you want to go to this nice school. So it kind of is insinuated almost that Uncle Aaron doesn't live a life that this family approves of. But Miles kind of responds by saying, oh, well, Uncle Aaron's a good guy, though. So you can tell he loves his uncle. And so then you get an introduction into him where Miles goes over Uncle Aaron's apartment and they go spray painting together. So they go, I don't know, where do they even go? Like underneath the subway?
Underground, like a, what is it called? Abandoned like subway station type place.
Yeah. So that's where they go and they're like spray painting this like huge mural. So you can tell they're both very artistically talented. And then Dina, a very important scene happens next. What happens next?
Next, you see the radioactive spider. Super important. The iconic how Spider-Man becomes Spider-Man. And it's actually a really interesting scene because you see this spider just like crawl around everything, like doesn't really know where to go, you know, type of thing. And he eventually does end up biting Miles, and like, you know, it becomes like this whole scene where it's like it seems so like intense and aggressive, like, oh my god, like this spider's about to bite him. It's like a lot of high adrenaline, but then like you see from the outside from Miles' perspective and he kind of just slaps the bug.
Yeah, he just like
away.
Exactly.
It's like, you know, not a big deal, it's just a bug, you know, but little does he know it's a radioactive spider.
His whole life's about to change. And so then we see him the next morning, and it's kind of a boarding school type, so he sleeps at the school. And so he wakes up the next morning, and then his pants don't fit right. They're like too small. And so he thinks that he hit puberty overnight and just grew. So that's his rationale as to why his pants don't really fit anymore. And so he's walking around.
To be honest, I'd probably think it was puberty and not like being bitten by a radioactive spider, if I'm honest.
That's true. My first thought would not be, oh, radioactive spider, I'm Spider-Man. That's it.
Again.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's his first thought process behind it. So he's walking all around school and he's like, why are my thoughts so loud? Like, my pants don't fit right. Like, all of this. He's really nervous. He's sweating a lot. And he thinks it's all because he's hit puberty.
And so he's like freaking out. He's like, why do my pants not fit? Blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of see him going, like, first of all, his thoughts become more like comic booky, like immediately after. Like before this, you don't really see that very comic book sense you kind of get from the movie. But then after he gets bit, like, he's like, why are my thoughts so loud? Because like you see them written on the screen as you would if it were a comic book type of thing, like those little text box things, whatever. And so he's walking around the school. You kind of see him very like overwhelmed with work and like whatever. And we meet Gwanda. Sorry.
Yeah, Gwanda.
She's like Gwen, Wanda, girl of many names, right? And
exactly. So essentially, Miles meets this girl. He met her a little while before, and she laughed at his joke when he was late to class. So he immediately in middle school, you're like, she likes me. She laughed at my joke. So he sees her the next day, and he spoke with his uncle about it, and he has a move he's going to try on her. He's going to like tap her on the shoulder and be like, hey, that's the move. That's it. And so he wants to go practice this on her when he runs into her after being bitten by the spider. The difference is his hand gets like stuck in her hair because he has all like the spider web things, and they all get caught in her hair. And so he's trying to take it out of her hair, and it's not working. So long story short, he like rips out like a huge chunk of her hair.
Yeah.
So that's just,
really
I mean, that has to hurt also.
Yeah.
But, like that's not a fun feeling. So essentially, you know, Miles is starting to realize like something is definitely wrong. And then he runs into the security guard, and the security guard says he knows that he snuck out last night when he snuck out with his Uncle Aaron to go spray paint in that subway station. And so he immediately starts running, and on his way running away, he like trips and falls, and like a comic book lands on his face, and he picks it up, and it's a Spider-Man comic book. And he resonates with the message of when Spider-Man, the Peter Parker, first became Spider-Man. And he sees, you know, the same things like, what's happening to me, like what's going on, like I'm sticking to things, like the same exact things happening in the comic book are happening to Miles. And so he is very confused. So he goes back to the subway station to see what happened.
And he looks and immediately he's like trying to call a bunch of people. He's like, I have to tell someone. He calls his Uncle Aaron, then he calls his dad, who doesn't end up picking up neither of them. And so he finally gets to the subway station. He finds the spider, and he like touches it, and he's like, it's a normal spider, as he thought earlier. Turns out it's not a normal spider. It starts to like melt or something. I don't even know.
It does something radioactive. It does
something, radioactive. Exactly. It's a radioactive spider. So he's like freaking out, and then out of nowhere, I forget how it happens. He like runs into a huge fight going on between the Spider-Man of his world that is currently still there, Peter Parker, and Green Goblin, which we all know from the Spider-Man movies. Green Goblin is like one of his big enemies, whatever. And it's like a huge fight between them two. And so Miles is like kind of overwhelmed. He's like, what's going on? Like, I mean, anyone would be if they stumble upon a superhero fight. And so like, oh my God. And so he's like running around, whatever. And then Peter Parker saves him. And he's like, oh my God, like they get some spidey sense together. He's like, oh my gosh, we're both spider people. Like, and like, so that was interesting. And he kind of becomes like, I can mentor you kind of thing.
Yeah, he tells him, exactly. So whenever the two Spidey people meet, they have these little like almost like lightning bolt type things come out of their head, and they're like,
Spidey sense.
You and I, we're the same. That's how you can kind of tell that they get that feeling, the Spidey sense, exactly. So Peter Parker tells Miles, you know, like, I have to go finish this fight. You stay here, like, don't move. I'll come back, and then I'll help you. You know, I'll help you kind of make sense of it all, because obviously he can relate because he went through the same thing, but he did it alone.
Right.
So,
No, keep going.
Okay, sure. So essentially, the reason that Peter Parker is fighting the Green Goblin, and then the Prowler is there too, and then this guy named Kingpin, who's this real like boxy guy. He's like the main villain, kind of like head honcho type person.
Mafia
the reason,
type man.
Exactly. Like his suit, just the whole. So essentially, the reason that this fight is happening is because Kingpin wants to start something called a collider, which will open a portal to another dimension. And so obviously Peter Parker doesn't want that to happen because it'll cause all the dimensions to come here, a black hole would open, everything would go wrong where they are.
As per usual. Everything will go wrong.
Everything is at stake. Everyone wants everything, you know, it's all of it. Exactly. So Spider-Man, Peter Parker obviously wants to stop this, but as the collider is going off, there's this huge like beam of energy going between it, and the Green Goblin kind of forces Spider-Man into the beam, and this causes a bunch of warning signals to come up on the computer mainframe that they're doing the collider beam on. I don't know how to describe that better than that. Yeah. And so Kingpin says essentially, you know, don't do that. That's gonna make things go wrong. Like, stop. And then after that happens, the whole system like kind of malfunctions and powers down, and Spider-Man, obviously, understandably, Peter Parker is weakened because he was shoved into like an energy portal beam. So he's obviously, exactly, like it's just not going well for him at that point. So Miles runs over to that Spider-Man, and Spider-Man tells him, you know, here's the key. Like, all you have to do is like turn off the machine. Like, you can't let them get what they want. So, And then at that point, Kingpin comes over and he kills Spider-Man. And then go ahead.
Very emotional. And then after that, Miles is like just starts running away basically. Like he tries to do what he was told, but he obviously can't. He doesn't really know what's going on. And so he starts running away from this like one of Kingpin's like people, I guess, the Prowler. And something I noticed, like a recurring type of theme, they play Purge, the music from the Purge, whenever the Prowler runs after him, which I just thought was very weird why they played that. I'm pretty sure it was like from the Purge or some horror movie, but I'm like 99% sure it was from the Purge, which I thought was like really weird, but it added to the movie, made it really intense and scary. And so whatever, and he like runs home and like he gets home and like he goes to his parents. He's like, basically, I had a really bad day. Can I stay home today? Whatever. And so he lays in bed, and on the news you hear that Spider-Man has died. And it's like this whole like emotional thing. Like Miles is super emotional. The whole city of New York is emotional, and it like becomes like this whole like mournful thing. It's like actually very emotional. I will not lie.
It surprisingly is really sad.
It was like, oh my God, Spider-Man is dead. And then they identified him as Peter Parker, 26-year-old from New York, works for the newspaper, whatever. It was so emotional. And then they start showing MJ, who's like we all know MJ as Spider-Man's like love interest, wife, whatever she is at that point.
Yeah, she was a wife to this one, I think.
Yeah, like speaking about him and like saying like he chose to be Spider-Man, like he could have like gotten these powers. It was actually very motivational. Like
it was sad.
It was sad. It was really sad though. Yeah,
it was.
For sure.
I mean, it was the best speech that she could do. Like that was. She did a really nice job with it. She had a way with words. And at this point, I mean, then Miles goes to kind of like a merch store, you could say, like a comic book store, merch store, whatever, and he picks up like a little Spider-Man costume, and they've actually animated Stan Lee into the movie as the kind of cashier owner of that store and sold it to him. And Miles asks him, he says, oh, if it doesn't fit, can I return it? And Stan Lee replies, eventually it will fit. Like it fits everyone eventually. Yeah. So it was kind of to be like, anyone can be Spider-Man, and also on the wall behind him it said no refunds, no exchanges. So it was like double-sided. So it was funny.
So that's funny, yeah. And so then Miles like goes to like this motivational whatever speech MJ is giving about Spider-Man dying, and then later he tries to jump off of a building and it doesn't work, and he's like, oh, I'm not Spider-Man, because like in every comic book ever his first thing is like climbing up a wall or jumping off a building or whatever, and so he's like, oh, I can't jump off a building, I can't be Spider-Man basically. So he goes to Spider-Man's grave, like the one who just died, and he's like, I can't do it, like you gave me so much responsibility, like I respect you, blah blah blah. And then some man comes up behind him, and it turns out to be a different Spider-Man. It looks the same, but he's different. He's a little chunkier. He's a little older looking.
He's a little sad.
He's a little sad looking, yeah. And so together, well, he kind of knocks this other Spider-Man out, but whatever. So they run away from the cops because they're like trespassing on a grave, basically. And so we find out, again, it's kind of like a parallel to the beginning of the movie when they were showing Peter Parker's original story, like the Spider-Man that just dies original story, where it was like you were looking at a comic book, like he was saying like I was the one and only Spider-Man. You kind of get a parallel. This is Peter B. Parker from a different really creative, from a different dimension, whatever, a different universe, and he goes over his whole backstory, whatever. It's similar, the same, radioactive spider, Uncle Ben dies, and then but what's different is he divorces MJ, his aunt dies. It's like an older and sadder version of the Peter Parker that just died, but this is Peter B. Parker.
Exactly, because the original Peter Parker at the beginning was only Spider-Man for 10 years, and this one was Spider-Man for 22 years.
Exactly, yeah.
So, like, more happened, it was, many more years. And I will also note that when Miles was trying to jump off the building, he accidentally broke the key that the original Peter Parker gave to him. So not only could he not originally turn off the machine, now he really can't because the key is broken. So at that point, so then the Peter B. Parker and Miles kind of get together and they have a plan. They're going to go to Alchemax, which is the laboratory where the people work to make the collider or whatever, to go hack into the computer mainframe and get program a new key so they can turn off the collider. And it turns out the main programmer of this is Doc Ock, who's another notorious villain in Spider-Man movies. And I will say, one of my favorites originally.
For sure.
Interesting character design. Yes, that's one of
woman. I liked it.
Yeah, it was interesting. She was fast. Like, she was intimidating.
She was scary for sure. But I did like that scene because you kind of get to see Miles' powers a little differently than the other Spider-Man.
Very true.
You figure out that he doesn't just have super sticky hands and
webby
super agility and like spider sense. He has more than just spider sense. He can do like venom shocks or something like that.
It's like electricity. I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, and he can also turn invisible, right? So you get to see him turn invisible, and he's like turns invisible while he like hacks his computer, whatever. Obviously, you don't get away with it. Doc Ock is like,
it's chasing after them.
After them. And something I always note from this movie. Well, first they were trying to get away from her, and so while they were getting away from her, Peter B. Parker was trying to teach Miles how to do the, what is it? Like
the swinging?
The swinging thing.
Yeah,
which is very cute.
It was cute.
Like, it was very cute. Like, he taught him and they went together. And one fun fact that I know about this movie that I will forever say is that during that scene, how they did it was they made Peter B. Parker, they animated him normally, the rest of the movie normally, which is 24 pictures per pixel or 24 pixels, whatever, something like that.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And then, or pictures per minute, something like that. And so, but they animated Miles as 12 pictures per second or whatever. So to make him look more choppy, kind of in a sense, to make him look more kind of not as smooth, not as professional, which is something I always will be astonished by, that they paid so much attention to detail in that movie to that sense. Anyway, love that scene when they're like swinging through the forest and running from her.
Exactly. I mean, it was really cool, and you could tell that obviously, even though this older Spider-Man was out of shape and he was older, he was still Spider-Man, so he was way more agile and athletic and able compared to Miles, who was just starting out and didn't really even know how to do anything. So at this point, they weren't able to successfully hack into the mainframe before being interrupted by Doc Ock, who's now chasing them. So their bright idea was to like seal the base of the computer. I don't remember what that's called, but do you know what I'm talking about? Like how there's the desktop and the thing is connected to
the actual computer itself.
Sure. Like I know. Yeah, it has a name, but I don't remember the name. So they're running away with that so they can use it later when they're at their like base to get it. And so they almost drop it, and then another Spider-Man comes in. Yet it's Spider-Gwen. So you get like kind of a similar introduction how you did with Peter Parker and Peter B. Parker, and it always says let's go back for the last time, though, and it's never really the last time.
Yeah, they show it in the comic book. They slap it down,
exactly. Yeah, it's really cool the way that they animate that exact type of sequence. So you get kind of an introduction into Gwen, and you see her journey. It's almost like if you watch the Spider-Man movies, the Andrew Garfield ones. It's in that universe, but she's the Spider person the whole time, and it's not Andrew Garfield. So it stays truer to what it was supposed to be originally. So I thought it was really nice, and her costume was the coolest.
For sure.
I liked it. Yeah, it was different. Like everyone else's was like red or whatever, and hers was like white. She had a hood. Like she would just look cool. She had like ballet slippers. Exactly. She just look cool.
Yeah.
So then at that point, you get introduced to her.
And so after you get introduced to her, she basically saves them from Doc Ock, and they manage to get away. And so their first step next after that, right? I'm doing the right order. Is they go to Aunt May's, and it's so emotional because in this universe, in this dimension, Aunt May just lost her Peter Parker, and so this older Peter Parker from a different dimension, who in his dimension, he lost his Aunt May. They kind of reunite, and it's like so heartfelt. But
it really is emotional.
It's so emotional. Like that's his first place to go to, and so immediately Aunt May like helps them, and she takes them to this like super secret base for the Spider-Man, and it's huge. Like it's like
huge.
this like crazy bat cave type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Peter B. Parker was like, "Oh yeah, like I had one like this, but just imagine it smaller and with a futon in the middle." He said something like that. It was funny. And so they get there, and so they're like, the three of them, Spider-Gwen, Peter B. Parker, and Miles are like, "Okay, so can you help us?" And she's like, "Yeah, but do you really think you were the first ones to come here?" And then you meet three more spider people from different universes. You have Penny Parker, who I don't know her like spider name. Do you know it? It's like robot spider. I don't know.
It's something like that.
Penny Parker, who, by the way, super cool animation thing. They made her anime. All the rest of them are like all different types of animation style, which I thought was like really cool. So she was like anime. And then there was Spider Noir, which is like this black and white Spider-Man who's like a PI in like the early 20s, the vibe.
Yeah, he was
like
cool.
He was cool, yeah. And then Spider Pig, who was voiced by John Mulaney, and it was hilarious. And so
it really was.
It was really funny. But I did think that it was very heartfelt that the first place they thought to go to was Aunt May's, because she's a consistent character in majority some way or another in every single universe. So I loved that.
Yeah, me too. I liked when all these, the three new Spider-Men got introduced. I thought it was cool because they kind of did like overlapping comic book introductions. They're like, oh, like let's go back to the beginning for the last time though, actually. And they, they did it. It was all overlapping. And then Peter B. Parker was kind of like, we don't have time. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
We get the idea. We know who you are.
We all have a similar thing.
Exactly. We're all basically the same, but like a little different. So I thought that was funny. And so then, they all are now going to work together to hack into the computer and reprogram the key, and then work together to destroy the collider and then make it back to their own dimensions, because they all are like glitching pretty consistently throughout the movie because they don't belong in this dimension. Like they need to go back, or else their like atoms are going to disintegrate or something. I believe that's what happens. Like they die, like something like that. They die. So they need to get back, obviously. And so then kind of the next scene, Miles is going to Uncle Aaron's apartment, and he's leaving a little note for him, kind of being like, oh, like I don't know what to do. Like I need your help. Like you can tell like Uncle Aaron's kind of like a person that Miles really looks up to and really, really trusts. And so then at that point, the Prowler is coming in through Uncle Aaron's window, trying to track down Miles because that was his job given to him by Kingpin. And at that point, Miles turns invisible because he doesn't want to be seen by the Prowler. Prowler's on the phone, and he says, oh, don't worry, I'll get that kid. And he takes off his mask. Guess who it is? It's Uncle Aaron. It's Uncle Aaron. As soon as the Prowler came at that window, I kind of had a feeling as soon as he came up to that window, but I was still almost like, I hope it's not. I really hope it's not.
And it was so upsetting. And so after he saw that whole thing, he was just so like kind of in anguish, I guess. Like he was so upset, so he kind of like ran away. And so he runs back to Aunt May's house, and he tells like all of the other Spider-Men, like, oh my god, my uncle is the bad guy or whatever. And they're like, were you followed? And he was like, I don't think so. Turns out
he absolutely was.
And so the first instinct that I loved, it was really cute, that Peter B. Parker had was like, Miles, go away. And Aunt May was like, can we not do this in my home?
Yeah, my house, I just cleaned, like.
Yeah, she was like, can you take this outside, please? Like, just don't be in here. And so they kind of whatever. And so Miles gets away, and then they're all kind of being really badly fought. Like they are getting pretty defeated. So Peter B. Parker drops that little like key thing.
They programmed it. Yeah, the goober.
Yeah, they programmed it, the goober, and he drops it, and Miles picks it up, and he's like, well, I gotta run now. And so he runs, and he's being chased by the Prowler, aka Uncle Aaron, and he's being chased, and they kind of get to this face-off where Miles is like being choked by him, like, and he's like on the edge, and then like Miles takes off his mask, and Uncle Aaron, aka the Prowler, is like, oh my god, like I can't kill my nephew. And so he kind of like takes him back up. And the most heart-wrenching scene in the whole movie, in my opinion, is immediately as he decides not to kill Miles because it's his nephew, he gets shot by Kingpin, because Kingpin is this big mafia man, and if you know anything of mafia type movies,
like if you don't do the job, like your life.
You're dead. Exactly. And so he's immediately shot, like within seconds. And it's so emotional. Like,
a lot.
This is my second time watching this movie, and I still was like getting a little teary eyed. I was like, oh my God.
I know.
And so what happens is Peter B. Parker, like all the other spider people, are like, Miles, run. Like, this place is about to explode, basically. And so Miles runs, but he takes Aaron's body with him, and he like goes to some alley, and he just starts crying, and it's like, it's so emotional.
It's so much.
So bad.
Like,
and like,
it is.
Ugh. And so his dad, being a cop, got some his dad being a cop got some like whatever notification, what is it, like call that like he has to be on the job because there's a disturbance in the city. And he goes to this alley and he sees a Spider-Man over his brother, dead brother. And so he's immediately like, oh, I blame Spider-Man. Right? Yeah,
because he already in the beginning he mentioned he didn't really like Spider-Man because obviously he's a police officer. Spider-Man's considered a vigilante, so they obviously don't work together. They don't really get along. He kind of despises that about Spider-Man. But regardless, so the dad blames Spider-Man for it because he sees him, and then Miles obviously gets away, and it's just he finds out his uncle Aaron, his brother Aaron, and it was just because they were distant. Brothers, they didn't talk ever really. He even said to Miles, oh, you don't want to end up like Uncle Aaron. So you could tell they didn't have the best relationship in the world, but still, just to see your brother like that, it's too much. It really is. And so then I guess the next scene would be that the other Spider-Man kind of tell Miles that they're going to go to the Collider and do the job, and that Miles isn't ready because he can't turn invisible on command. He can't do the zappy thing on command. He can't do a lot of these things without, just on a whim, I guess you could say. He can't control his abilities yet because, he's only been Spider-Man for like a day. So at that point, he doesn't really know how to control it. So at that point, he gets strapped to the chair at that minute and by Peter B. Parker. And so Peter B. Parker and the rest of the Spider-Man all leave to go to the Collider, and Miles is strapped to his chair in his dorm room. So then,
so the next scene is like his dad kind of like starts to knock on the door, I'm assuming, to tell him that Uncle Aaron died. And it's kind of this very emotional scene where his dad's like, Miles, I love you, and Miles like can't say anything back because he's tied up, whatever. And that kind of becomes his like this whole like scene with his dad, this very emotional like Miles, I love you, whatever scene, kind of becomes his like pushing point. Earlier, Peter B. Parker said like when he was tying him up and telling him he can't go, he was like, you'll know you're Spider-Man when you take the leap of faith. And so this was kind of his leap of faith. And so he kind of just like takes all the power and very motivational, and he just rips through these whatever like the spider webs, whatever. And he just like jumps out of that place, and he puts his Spider-Man-ness to work. He goes to Aunt May's. He gets like the web thing, the web shooters.
Yeah, he designs his own new costume, which is very cool.
Yeah, very quickly, might I add.
Yeah, very quickly. Exactly. And so then essentially, he now feels ready. So he goes to where the rest of the fighting is happening with all the other Spider-Men. And so then a huge fight sequence ensues. And at this point, I think there's about half an hour left in the movie. And it's pretty much all fight scene. And I'm not mad about it. It was absolutely beautifully animated. It was beautifully done. It was incredible to watch. It was just an epic way to end the movie.
It was incredible. And the thing about the animation is like they use so many different animation styles in one that it's like so hard to look, but so amazing to look at the same time. And like you don't know like where to, it's just
exactly like the whole screen is filled the whole time with just a million different things happening. Just color the whole time. It's amazing.
Color, dimension, like
exactly, because at this point like they're where the Collider is, so all the other dimensions are coming in through the Collider into this dimension that they're in. So it's like chaotic in a sense. They're fighting against the clock, they're racing against these dimensions all crashing in on them. And so then slowly, one at a time, they're defeating all the villains, they're doing all of this, and the Spider-Men are returning to their dimensions. I will mention that the little robot Spider-Man got hurt and like died a a little.
Very sad.
Yeah, during this, very sad, very unnecessary, very Big Hero 6 reminiscent, I'll say.
Yeah.
Like, it was just very sad.
Yeah, and I will add earlier, before they started this fight scene, when like Miles was like having his whole leap of faith moment where he was like getting his, act together, I guess. After he left Aunt May's, there's like this very iconic like animation scene where he jumps off a building. It's shown as the cover art for a lot of things. And something about that scene is that at the end of it, like once he jumps off that building, you kind of see the Miles Morales comic book put on top of the pile of all the other comic books that you saw earlier when all the other Spider-Men were telling his backstory. So it kind of lets you know, like, he just had his backstory. He's Spider-Man now. Like, he is Spider-Man. So I liked that. It was a very nice parallel that they continue to have.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, this fight scene is absolutely incredible. So at a certain point, all the other Spider-Men have returned to their dimensions, including the other Peter B. Parker. And now it's up to Miles to defeat Kingpin and kind of turn off this colliding machine. And at this point, this scene is like a little bit intense because you see Miles almost, having the tide turned on him to where Kingpin is almost going to win the fight. But then his dad, a police officer, can obviously come to the scene and he's cheering on Spider-Man, not knowing that it's his son. So at this point, you see that the dad is, cheering him on for someone that he thinks killed his brother. So he kind of realizes now that, oh, he's a good guy. Like, I just, I misunderstood the situation. And so then kind of a nod to Uncle Aaron, and I guess the final blow for Miles defeating Kingpin was the kind of flirty shoulder touch that Uncle Aaron taught him how to do with Gwen earlier in the movie. He does to Kingpin, but he zaps him and then kind of tosses him to hit the green button because it's, notorious through the whole movie that you just hit the green button to turn off the machine. Which is kind of ironic because isn't it normally the red button? But regardless, it's the green button. And so then, the collider stops, the whole thing explodes. No one gets hurt though, but the whole thing explodes. And so, Miles did it. His first real job as Spider-Man. He took the leap of faith and he was able to do it. So at that point, Miles, escapes to like the top of a building or something and immediately calls his dad. And his dad obviously is really busy right now because there's a lot going on. But Miles says, oh, hey, Dad, like, sorry, is this a bad time? And the dad immediately is like, absolutely not. Like, what's up, son? I love you. And so at that point, I was...
it was so cute.
Yeah, it made my heart, like, feel nice. It was cute.
And Miles, like, got off the building, and he, like, put on his mask, and he pretended to be Spider-Man. He was like, hello, officer, like...
like the deep voice.
Like, in like, a funny, deep voice. And then he hugs him, but, like, he thinks it's Spider-Man. It's so cute.
It's so cute.
After that, he leaves, and he's like, I love you. And it's, like, so awkward. Because he's, like, this Spider-Man. And then he's, like, also, like, turn around, and... behind him is Kingpin hung up by a bunch of spider webs with a sign that says, from your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, which is a parallel to literally every single other Spider-Man. The first ever kind of capture whatever they have, that's what they do. They put the little note on it. So I love that. And it kind of ends with this whole, like, everybody's a hero type spiel that MJ did give earlier. But, like, this time it's given by Miles Morales. And it's very cute.
It's very cute. And it's, like, as he's, like, flying through the city, like, kind of debuting the new Spider-Man. And he's, high-fiving people, like, saying hi to babies, doing the whole nine. And it's just absolutely adorable. And he ends it by saying, oh, I'm the only Like, I've been Spider-Man for 2 days, and I'm the only Spider-Man. Like, it's just, it's very cute. Yeah. Exactly. It's just a very cute ending. And at the end of it, he ends up on his bed in his dorm room at the school. And then you hear Gwen. He says Gwen, or Gwen says Miles, something like that. They're talking to one another. And that is setting it up for the sequel that is set to release in 2022. So get excited for that, everyone.
And I will add that, as with every single Marvel movie ever, you should know at this point to watch the end credit scenes. The first end credit scene was a quote by Stan Lee, which was very emotional because I think that this movie did come out soon after that he passed. So it was very like, oh, like, And then the last one, it's very hard to explain this last one, but it basically shows another multiverse in Nueva York with Miguel as Spider-Man. And he kind of is like trying out this new thing where he can freely go through the multiverse of Spider-Man, and he goes to Earth 67, which is the original Spider-Man Earth, which I don't know if anyone ever watched the original Spider-Man cartoons from like the 60s, I want to say 70s,
Mm-hmm.
where there's like this iconic scene. It was a meme once where these two Spider-Men are kind of like pointing at each other. And so yeah, and Miguel becomes the other Spider-Man. Very funny. So just so you know, always watch to the end credit scenes.
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, that's pretty much all that I have for this movie. Overall, I loved it. It was really cute. It was heartwarming. And even though, you know, it's for kids, I enjoyed it. And I'm an adult, and I can say that.
Exactly. And kids movies are always so empowering and so heartfelt. Like, it's a good watch. I enjoyed it. I
really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Definitely. So make sure to tune in next week. We'll be reviewing the Hunger Games series. So all 4 of the movies, just kind of general plot points of the whole 4 movies. So tune back in next week if you like it. If you don't like it, if you want to hear our opinion on it, make sure to watch it and come join us next week.
And make sure to follow all our socials at Boca Tribune on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, as well as to watch this later on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.